Another prominent restaurant entrepreneur is facing claims of harassment as more accusations emerge against Mario Batali.
It's the restaurant industry's open secret.
World-renowned chef John Besh has stepped down from his own company after a NOLA.com report cited 25 employees claimed they were victims of sexual harassment while working at several of his restaurants.
According to the Harvard Business Review, more sexual harassment claims in the U.S. are filed in the restaurant industry than in any other.
It's rampant in every industry, and the culinary industry is no different. It's finally time. People are able to find their voices, able to speak up, and feel like there won't be repercussions.
Many are now asking how sexual abuse and harassment in the industry has persisted as long as it has, some acknowledging their own complicity.
I provide a validation for a kind of a meathead mentality, a bro, sort of meathead bro culture that, has not been good, particularly for women.
Prominent restaurant critics are wrestling with their own role as well, even rethinking their jobs as journalists. How do you review a restaurant whose chef is accused of serious wrongdoing? Or should you review it at all? Food writer Tim Carman turned his critical eye on his colleagues in an article for the Washington Post. And Tim, you spoke to a number of food critics in preparation for all of this. What made you want to explore it in the first place?
Well, there was an essay by Craig Laban, who is the food critic for the Philadelphia Inquirer, and he was sort of the first that I knew about to dip his toe into this conversation of how to review restaurants in the sort of Metoo movement, Metoo era. And I think he sort of expressed himself, he came down on this notion that, if I can paraphrase, he came down on the notion that he was not an investigative reporter, he was a food critic, and unless he had hard evidence, he wasn't going to really mention any innuendo or sort of rumors that he heard. And he took a little bit of flack from that online. We took a lot of flack. He got some support, but he also took a lot of flack. And I realized that this was probably a conversation worth having with other critics.
Where do you stand on this now? I mean, you note that it is new as a movement, but where are you left the next time you go into a restaurant knowing the things that you know because of the circles you run in?
Well, in the story that I wrote for the Post, I emailed Anthony Bourdain, and he came down pretty hard on critics. He was taking us to task for what he thought was our culpability in, the current restaurant climate. And it got me to think, what part did we play in this role? And I think, we clearly played a role in promoting certain chefs who may or may not have deserved it. None of my colleagues that I know, I think held back any punches. If they learned about anything, we wrote about it. But now we've got to grapple with this idea of how to review a restaurant that may have a manager, an owner, a chef that has been accused of sexual harassment. And, we're journalists, and, we're journalists first, and I think we have to look at all the reasons that go into a restaurant, or, all the sort of tertiary aspects of a restaurant that may affect a diner's perception of it. And this is definitely part of it. There are diners who will never walk into a Mario Batali restaurant in New York again or anywhere else. And so we have to, I think as critics, we have to think about this and look at it and see how it colors our own perceptions and how it may therefore color a diner's perception of walking into, say, a John Besh restaurant.
All right. Tim, thanks for bringing us your perspective.
Of course, my pleasure.